With the release of 3.3, we've received a massive expansion on lore, and Scaramouche's excellent Irminsul adventure is just the tip of the iceberg. Looking deeper, it seems our hunches about King Deshret and the Goddess of Flowers knowing far more about the origins of Teyvat and Celestia's true intentions have proven to be correct, confirmed by the descriptions on the brand new Flower of Paradise Lost artifact set. If you've watched our previous videos, as well as my own lore deep dive on the Celestial Nails, the topics we're about to delve into ought to be rather familiar. Today's artifact set's very name is a reference to Milton's Paradise Lost, so you know we're in for a ride.
We strongly recommend that you watch our video about the Arandara weapons first, as a couple of those stories are needed to paint the full picture of what these artifact descriptions have to say, and I'll leave a link to that one in the description for your convenience. That said, it's likely that everything from here on out is going to be a massive spoiler for patch 3.3 and everything that came before it, so be warned.
This artifact set delves into the history of King Deshret and even reveals the origin of the Goddess of Flowers, as well as hinting at what really happened to them both. It takes a bit of reading between the ley lines, but we feel that this artifact lore gives us the answers to a lot of questions we've been asking ever since Dragonspine and Enkonomia. I have never been more excited to present information to our viewers, and that's saying something. I'm Ganymede.
And I'm Psyche, and we'll be your guides to one of the two brand new artifact sets introduced in version 3.3, the Flower of Paradise Lost.
Icanoom's Myriad. Generally speaking, we try to arrange a series story in chronological order, hoping to make them easier to understand, and we've done our best with this set, despite the fact that it is rather vague and jumps around a bit itself.
The Flower of Life piece is the first that we'll be covering, and its initial description reads as follows. An amethyst bloom that has been beautifully sculpted in the image of an ancient extinct flower, followed by,
in a bygone time, which only the Jinn recall, the Lord of Flowers was cast aside by the heavens. Her magnificent vessel was left a savaged husk, her kinsfolk punished by way of being stripped of their minds. Legend has it that the Lord of Flowers wandered the barren wastes for 72 nights. Her heels were worn through by the merciless gravel. Her wounds gushed into limpid springs, turning into streams with no boundaries. Thence, those streams flowed into verdant gardens, from which sprouted night-blue water lilies. Water lilies are the mothers of the Jinn, and the Jinn were birthed from intoxicating dreams and the bitter memories of loss.
The first Jinn were creatures of wisdom. They indulged in innocent dreams and love just as sweet. To thank their creator, the infantile Jinn took their mistress by the arm and granted her a laurel wreath of wild chrysanthemums. O Lord of Flowers, Master of the Garden, we beg of thee, stay, leave us not. Yes, please, Dream Mother, Mistress of Forgetting and Wine, we beg of you, remain Queen of this garden. As so detained by the gentleness of the Jinn, the exiled goddess remained in this garden of flowers. Gorgeous purple flowers, bearing semblance to the moon, bloomed wherever she stepped by. They were named Padisar.
There is so much to dive into here. Almost every word, every sentence is valuable and tells us more about other myths and legends we've heard on our journey. We'll do our best to stay concise, but there's a lot of information to disseminate. The first bit says that the Lord of Flowers was cast aside by the heavens, leaving her magnificent vessel a savaged husk. Now to briefly touch on what we covered in our Arandara Weapons series video. This lore gave us some of the most detailed information about the three Moon Sisters we've received so far, while the other tales stated that all three sisters perished due to fighting each other. The accounts in Sumeru state that 2 of the sisters killed each other, while a third retreated to her lunar palace, never to emerge again. I noticed also after the update that a new loading card with info about the Seelie appeared that I hadn't seen before and isn't listed on the wiki or anything else just yet. It states, Seelie, a certain race, once almighty, has been cursed to degenerate into nothing but these empty husks. Once again, using the same language that the Goddess of Flowers does to describe her vessel to describe the Seelies themselves. I think it being called a heavenly vessel is important too. While the word can have different meanings, it first brings to mind some kind of transportation. Maybe a moon chariot? Interestingly enough, we now have precedent for what happened to Conria as well. This is not the first time that a race has been cursed to degenerate, their intelligence lost and forms twisted as punishment for some transgression against the divine, and I believe even the more prominent survivors of this, such as Dainsleif, Piero, Kaya, and the Abyss Twin themselves, also set precedent. There seem to always be a handful of powerful people who, perhaps by order of their lineage or own will, manage to escape or resist the curse laid upon their people, and the Goddess of Flowers fits this bill.
We believe we have good reason to assume that the Goddess of Flowers may very well be that surviving moon sister. The reason for this is in the language used to describe the vessel she left behind, as it is similar language as is used to describe the one remaining moon in the skies of Teyvat, as well as the Sealies themselves post-curse. In these legends, it is said that the visible moon is the last moon sister's corpse. According to the version told in Sumeru, the three sisters once delighted in roaming the desert, and after the deaths of their first two, their moon wheels shattered into dust and fell upon Sumeru. Wherever the dust fell, Nilatpala lotuses bloomed.
Whether the Jinn are as similar to the other mystical lost races of Teyvat are to each other, for example, the Seelie and the Lockfolk or Oceanids, remains to be seen, but I think they will be proved to be exactly that. In fact, I think the word Jinn is just a colloquial word for the Seelie that gathered around and maybe descended from the Goddess of Flowers in their shared exile, just as the ancestor Seelie shed parts of itself that were lesser beings. The Lockfolk resemble Seelies, just as the remnants of the Thunderbird's rage resemble the Lockfolk. My theory is that all of these beings are the same at their root, or at the very least evolved from the same root species. The Goddess of Flowers seems to have a lot of connections to the Lockfolk specifically, and not only for her ability to produce flowing, pure water everywhere she stepped. Up until now, the confirmed gods we have met all started as something that was not human. Zhongli was an Arc Adeptus. Venti, a wind sprite, described as a single branch broken off of Istaroth's Thousand Winds. Nahida, in the same way, was created from Irminsul. Makoto and A are the only ones we don't know exactly what they were, but due to their inner circle, we can assume they were likely yokai themselves. I mention this if only to say that we have precedent for any kind of non-human being able to achieve godhood, meaning that there were likely god beings or those capable of achieving god status among the Seelie as well. Allegenes are still a bit of a mystery to us, but it seems like most of the ones we've now seen of legendary status were in fact non-human. Okay, back to the Seelie and the Lockfolk.
In previous in-game events involving them, we learned that the Lockfolk rely on water to maintain their intelligence. When separated from whatever body of water they call home, the loss of intelligence happens rather quickly, and it takes a great deal of time to restore it. They can do this mainly by joining directly with pure sources of water, even a person's tears. The Lockfolk seem to share a species-wide fear of falling in love with humans, perhaps in part due to their immortality and the fact that they will, of course, outlive a human lover, and the fact that they cannot join with living creatures without most likely drowning them. One important note is that they can also somehow regain some intelligence by gazing upon the moon's reflection in water. We must also, of course, look at the way this seems to harken back to the story of the ancestor Seelie, whose whole race was punished for their union with an outlander by having her memories stripped away.
The Moon's sisters dwelled in a place called the Lunar Palace and loved the morning stars who were said to have driven the solar chariot. When the calamity that took the life of two of the moons struck, it is said to have overturned the heavens and the earth, which, while the moons are not mentioned directly in this account, is an event mentioned in exactly the same language in the book Before Sun and Moon from Enkanomiya. This was the time period called the funerary year, which resulted in the city sinking below the earth and being cut off from the rest of Teyvat. The Seelie race was the cause of this great calamity, though it is never said why exactly they were punished. The Seelie ancestor fell in love with and wed an outlander who we know nothing about, and the three Moon sisters hosted this wedding in their lunar palace. This seems to be the event that caused the calamity and perhaps why the race was punished, but why the lunar palace? I believe that the explanation for this is that the lunar sisters were Seelies themselves, and that the Seelies originally dwelt among the stars. This would explain why the heavenly envoys were described as descending from the heavens to walk among men. And it may also suggest that the reason why the ancestor Seelie was punished was that they were supposed to guide humanity in accordance with the divine laws, not fall in love with and copulate with them, much like biblical angels. Is this, perhaps, why all of the gods we now know bear true names that match those of demons in the Ars Goetia, signifying their status as fallen angels by default?
It was after this wedding that the calamity came and the ancestor Seelie was punished. The two lovers to be eternally separated and their memories wiped as punishment. Despite this, the ancestor Seelie was said to be so bereaved that she withered away and slowly dissolved into the spectral Seelies that lead us to treasure as we see them scattered around Teyvat today. Perhaps her love for the Outlander remains in their desire to guide and help the traveler on their journey. This is only one account of the story, however, and leaves us to wonder if this was indeed the final fate of that Seelie. So, to wrap things up here, in the Aranura Weapon series, a new version of the Moon Sisters' fate was revealed, with the two dead sisters' heavenly bodies, the moons themselves, shattering into dust and raining down upon Teyvat. This is the origin story for the Nilatpa Lotus of Sumeru. According to the Aranura, this story itself was whispered to them by a Nilatpa Lotus, which may suggest that the tale comes directly from the dwindling consciousness of one of the Moon Sisters herself.
If the goddess of flowers is indeed a Seelie, why is it that she alone retained her mind while the others received this punishment of seemingly losing their intelligence and sentience, if she was not, in fact, the surviving Moon Sister? If we assume the sisters were somehow higher rank or even likened to gods versus the average Seelie, again, something like Daneslave, Pyrrho, and Kaya, if she was just a normal Seelie, then she might have well become an Oceanid or a Treasure Seelie. Instead, she mentions that husk of her heavenly vessel, still in the sky of Teyvat to this day, if my theory is correct.
The Treasure Seelie are all said to be fragments of the Seelie who unwittingly caused this great calamity. But what about the rest of her race? I think that those Seelie likely became the other arcane entities of Teyvat, like the Lockfolk and the Jinn, and even the Thunderbird, Kana Kapachker, may have come from this same root. More on that in another artifact piece, though.
The Amethyst Crown. The crown's description reads, a crown inlaid with amethyst and emerald. It seems to have been the headgear worn by ancient priests of the goddess of flowers. It then goes on to tell this tale.
In a bygone time of which only the Jinn sing, the Lord of Flowers once met the King of the Red Sands. In an age where kings vied against one another for power, King Deshret allowed his throne to be shared with two others. The Jinn bequeathed a throne inlaid with emeralds and rubies to celebrate the union between the three friends. In honor of the eternal oasis and the flourishing Padisar, the Lord of Flowers wore an amethyst crown. But eternity is ultimately a lie. Intoxication and love could only grind memories down to broken dreams. You once asked me why I always sigh. Tonight, while the moon is bright, let me speak to you of things long past.
It was a faraway time of calm and peace. Divine envoys spoke openly with the people then, bringing them the word from the heavens. But in time, invaders descended from beyond the firmament, bringing with them destruction, overturning rivers, spreading plagues. And though the invaders brought war to my former kin, they also brought about illusions that could break through the shackles to the land. But the master of the heavens, consumed by fear for the rising tide of delusion and breakthroughs, sent down the divine nails to mend the land, laying waste to the mortal realm. We then suffered the torment of exile. Stripped was our connection to heaven, to our powers of enlightenment.
Since the disaster, I have long been cursed to never again look upon the heavens. It is my fortune that I have been able to maintain myself till now, but my home calls to me nigh constantly, even as a disaster between the stars and the abyss grows ever emergent on the surface of the crystals. Heed my warnings. Seek not the master of the four shades, and inquire not of the mysteries of the sky and the abyss. Otherwise, as shown by the nail of retribution, certain calamities and sorrow shall follow. However, King Deshret disagreed with the warnings of his partner, silently swearing his intent to transgress. Wiping clean the tears of his companion beneath the moon's gaze, he spoke then of his own desire to the goddess of flowers.
This story is an absolute bombshell of lore. I've talked here a lot about the lore of Dragonspine's Salvandagnir civilization and about Enkanomiya and the prehistorical civilization that it revealed to us. This account from the goddess of flowers, directly to King Deshret, of the quite literally forbidden knowledge recorded in the Book of the Sun and Moon, brings all of the elements of these stories together into one tale. In my video on the Celestial Nails, I talked about how some kind of event in which objects fell from Celestia and pierced the crust of the earth was witnessed by multiple sources, including the Thunderbird of Tsurumi Island, who knew not what to make of them as she was, well, just a bird, and thought like a bird, as well as King Deshret himself, as recorded in the description from the Staff of Scarlet Sands. And obviously, there's our first account of this, with regard to Salvandagnir and the eternal uninhabitable blizzard on Dragonspine.
The account of Salvandagnir, as well as the description of the various elemental circlets that world bosses sometimes drop as an artifact, all mention a time before the Archons when envoys of the heavens walked among the people, guiding them. One of Dragonspine's murals even seems to depict one of these beings, wearing something like a winged crown and having a pair of wings upon their back. There have been many theories as to what this being is, but now I think we can safely say that the original envoys of the heavens, under the original primordial one, were in fact the Seelies in their prime. As a little side note, I think this also leans heavily into the theory that Paimon herself is a survivor of their race, with the same instinct to serve as a guide. Also, has anyone noticed that the 3 moons of Teyvat are in her cape? Yeah. It would also explain why she lost her memory, as all Seelies and Seelie descendants have, but why is she still so fully sentient? Isn't that only reserved for Seelies of god rank, according to my theory? Well, we'll have to see how that plays out, won't we?
This also seems to finally confirm the true order and outcome of events mentioned in Enkanomiya's lore, that the second who came was not related to the primordial one and his shades at all, and was something else different entirely, an actual literal alien entity. I know a lot of serious theory crafters hate crossing the streams, but as someone who knows both games' lore somewhat well, I hear the description of the disaster wrought by the second who came, and it sounds really similar to what the Honkai does when it is activated. Honkai isn't just the big mecha beasts and kaiju, but also known for spreading plagues, among other things. Invaders descended from beyond the firmament, bringing with them destruction, overturning rivers, and spreading plagues.
This makes the following comment about the invaders also bringing illusions that could break the shackles of the land all the more fascinating. What shackles, and what are they holding back? Whatever happened when the second who came arrived was enough to send the then ruler of the heavens into panic mode, firing off a barrage of celestial nails to intentionally lay waste to the mortal realm. Their concern was not just over this invader, but the rise of delusion and breakthroughs, perhaps having something to do with this external power, totally not Honkai, giving mortals power that threatened that of the heavenly throne's own. If we think in terms of the Honkai universe, could it be that somehow Teyvat was in one of the few safe pockets in the wider universe, and those who came from beyond brought the Honkai threat with them?
What if, assuming that the Honkai connection is really this prevalent, that the primordial one, the first throne in heaven, recognized its threat when it arrived and scoured the world, resetting human progress in order to save it? Or was it their own act of fear in regard to the invader upending the order of things as they had been? After this, it seems the early gods and their servants were exiled from the heavens, suggesting that the second who came did in fact win the war against the primordial one and set up their own rule, unlike what the scribes of Enkanomiya assumed and had written in their records.
The goddess of flowers goes on to say that though she was cursed to never return to the heavens, she's managed to maintain herself until now, suggesting that this elder race was perhaps unsuited for dwelling in the mortal realm long term. Likely to prevent this intermixing with humans their race was inevitably punished for. She says that her home in the heavens still calls to her and that a calamity between the stars and the abyss is ever emergent, written upon the faces of the crystal. This is interesting too, as the word crystal is so far in this context mostly used in regards to the crystalline nails themselves, and will come up again in another artifact piece of this set.
This also adds to my theory that the power of the nails might be seized and used by other forces once they've been dropped, as evidenced by the Abyss Order's attempt to approach the one in the chasm, and the presence of Conria's ruin guards, all transmitting the status of their failed mission to grasp the power of the Skyfrost nail. While the Heavenly Throne fired these nails off like weapons, the primordial power contained therein seems to be able to have the potential to be broken down and used by lesser beings, much like the Chasm's Lumenstone Adjuvant gadget, which was used to light the way and purify the dark mud throughout. It was, after all, made from fragments of the sky crystal, colloquially called Lumenspar, found in the chasm, and King Deshret refers to the nails as spikes of purification.
With this in mind, I think it's rather interesting that many objects scattered throughout King Deshret's realm seem to have cores made of this crystal, the exact same asset visible within the crystal nails that we can see firsthand.
The goddess of flowers warns her friend in this moment to never seek the master of the four shades or the secrets of the sky or the abyss, and cites the nails as the tragedy and sorrow that will follow such actions. Yikes. That's actually genuinely terrifying with what we know and confirms a lot of our suspicions up to this point.
Honestly, if you let us, we could talk about this one piece for hours, so it's best we move on to the next while we still can.
The Wilting Feast. The first part of the description reads, "A feather left behind by a long-extinct bird species. It was inlaid with gold and gems by the ancient adherents of the goddess of flowers." Then, another story from the same time period emerges.
In a bygone time of which only the Jinn Reap, the mistress of oases, made a final choice. At that time, she learned that her fate was no riddle, but the key to opening a mysterious doorway. Through King Deshret's words and aspirations, she saw the possibility to transcend the absurd shackles that governed this world. Rejecting the gift granted by the divine throne, the red-crowned king sought a new path of his own volition. Though the future she revealed was ruinous and bleak, the king refused to yield an inch, even knowing that the journey was to be fraught with peril, even knowing those dearest to him were certain to fade before his very eyes. The Red Lord chose a noble lie, shepherding his followers on a path towards oblivion.
You seek but to chain the winds. Upon the tombstone of divinity shall humanity become the god of gods. Such a carefree dream was certain to be unmade. In ruins where lies are sundered, humanity will become the king of kings. The Lord of Flowers capitulated to her friend's folly, finding a most admirable rebellion burning within the ambitions of the god. An idea that joined the wisdom of thousands and the great attempt at binding their dreams to power. What hides here is more than lies, but also the future of humanity, burning like sparks of hope.
Dreams will always dissolve, their landscapes faded to collapse. This is the true meaning of the blooming flowers. Only by suffering through the destruction of a god's delusion can humanity learn to rise against divine will, just as the stubborn god king orchestrated this secret rebellion, surviving on the strength of individual will alone. However, the Lord of Flowers never knew a love that could be as sweet as wine, let alone the paltriness of human emotion. Brilliant as she was, even she could not easily predict when these little beings would finally realize the truth. Have these so-called gods not been superfluous to you since the beginning?
This tale seems to give us more of the emotional heart of the relationship between the Goddess of Flowers and King Deshret. She knew that he had begun down a path of no return, but placed her hope in his rebellion all the same. Perhaps she hoped for vengeance in her own way, or with her ability to observe and understand fate, saw far into the future and believed that whatever Deshret was about to do would pave the way for humanity to one day succeed where they, divine beings, had failed.
I can't help but look at this phrase, "you seek but to chain the winds," and think immediately of Isseroth, also known as Kairos and the Thousand Winds, the god of time which has existed in so many ancient places. Is there a link between her and Sumeru as well? Venti came from a thread of the Thousand Winds, Isseroth's child in a sense, and she was worshipped alongside him in ancient Mondstadt. In Enkanomiya, she was nearly a chief deity until Orobashi came from the Dark Seas outside of Teyvat. And in Inazuma proper, she very likely is the driving force that helped save Inazuma from the calamity by manipulating time so that Makoto could allow the planting of the sacred Sakura tree.
In the same breath, an ideal and a goal that is actually rather common in the world of beloved JRPGs and classic video games of many stripes is uttered. The desire to see the rule of gods overturned, the reins of history placed firmly into the hands of mankind. Nothing more rousing for the human spirit than a ragtag band of misfits teaming up to save their loved ones and curb-stomping God and all authority in the process, in my opinion. Some of my fondest gaming memories. Looking forward to carrying out King Deshret's will. I've officially converted to Scarlet King worship. No, I will not take any questions.
Anyway, it seems to suggest that the goddess of flowers at least believed that they would have to walk the path of their own destruction in order to leave even the smallest hope of humanity breaking free of their chains. It also states that King Deshret rejected the gift offered by the divine throne, which I think likely refers to his reaction to the beginning of the Archon War, suggesting that he had no desire or intention to claim a place among the seven. This, again, harkens to the repeated theme we hear throughout Teyvat, that Teyvat's fate is cyclical. In the current time, the Abyss is rising, and a god has once more turned their back on Celestia, determined to wage war against them, the Tsaritsa. She seems to be repeating the folly of the Scarlet King, but to what end? Also, doesn't that feather look a little familiar? Remember when we were viewing Kana Kapashkar's memories and she mentioned that she remembered being given a name by her, but had forgotten both the name and the person who gave it to her?
The Secret Keeper's magic bottle. The bottle is described thusly: a small bottle made of purple crystal. An emerald cap keeps it tightly sealed. Then it goes on to tell this tale.
In a bygone time in which the Jinn alone are silent, King Deshret poured his deepest ambitions out before the Lord of Flowers. As the moonlight's visage drifted across ripples within a glass of pomegranate wine, the Lord of Flowers finally succumbed to the persuasion of a friend most beloved. The words King Deshret spoke that night remain unknown to all. Even the eldest Jinn bestow only silence when asked about that which was said. None know what secret desires King Deshret revealed in the dark past daylight, desires that might shock even the wisest of gods. But the Lord of Flowers herself drew enlightenment from the exchange. It had been within her calculus, something long foreseen. The desert and oasis were sovereigns most high, yet held wild thoughts of rebellion the most strongly. I shall keep your secrets on account of the feelings my heart holds for you and the Lord of Wisdom. I shall fasten you a bridge to allow you to slake your deepest wants, but you must fear not the crystalline sapphire nail. I will deliver you unto higher knowledge, but as I have warned, you are fated to lose much in this exchange. Nevertheless, hide my lesson in your heart. Remember the punishment that once was inflicted on the fallen envoys of heaven. Know this: if there is to be hope in this world, it will be found kindling within mortals most ordinary. Wreathed in darkness, she guided her dearest friend towards the path to understanding all there was to know about the skies and the abyss. Using his body as a conduit and offering the oasis in trade, he let the dazzling radiance consume him to see his deepest desires be made manifest. Sandstorms swept in revelrous havoc across the paradise that was now missing one of its gods, folding the skies with yellow sand. swallowing all in calamity. King Deshret returned from the swirling sands that devoured the sky. The Lord of Flowers, however, was never seen again. I just dreamed of you, feeling your way through the walls of a crystalline maze. All that can be seen is but sand.
In the end, King Deshret was willing to go to any lengths to spark his rebellion against the heavens. His true goals, though, as the artifacts tell us, remain hidden. Though the Jinn might know, they will not speak of it. Theories abound with regard to the Moon Sisters and their roles, perhaps matching that of the Fates, the three sisters who exist in many different mythologies who rule over the loom of fate, the past, present, and future of every being woven from the threads they spin. In Greek myth, they are called the Moirai, and in ancient Norse, the Norns. This artifact further suggests that if the goddess of flowers is indeed the surviving Moon Sister, that they do, or did, in fact, fill these very same roles in Teyvat's mythos. She saw and knew her own fate from the beginning, and had divined even what path King Deshret would take despite her warnings. Deshret's account in the tale of the Staff of Scarlet Sand's description ends with him accepting that the forbidden knowledge he had brought into the world could not remain, and despite the sacrifice the goddess of flowers made in order to forge this bridge for him, he conceded to ask Rukkhadevata to seal it away, inevitably spelling his own demise. Here, we have finally confirmed to us too that the nature of the forbidden knowledge is quite literally what we are seeking. The nature of the world. The black poison that corrupted Durin and Dvalin, the black mud gushing up within the chasm that carried memories of Conria's calamity. Nahida tells us that it's knowledge from the very depths of the abyss and that no one can comprehend it. But is that true? Or is it simply too dangerous with the eyes of Celestia always watching? What if the theories about Irminsul being a computer are true and the nature of the current operating system, implemented by the current heavenly throne, reacts to the knowledge of the world's true origins as a computer might to a malware or virus? First, the programs within the computer start to bug out. This is when the madness spreads, along with the dark mud. Then, the spikes of purification come to delete the corrupted data if that first outbreak was not contained.
So why is it that we are not allowed to know that Celestia is ruled by invaders from beyond the firmament that encases Teyvat, separating it from the larger universe as in the Gnostic model of the world? Why is that knowledge so damning that absolutely no one can know about it? We think it's that Celestia, and the second who came, who now sits upon its throne, is afraid. Afraid that such knowledge will unite Teyvat and all of mankind to rise up and break their shackles.
A moment congealed. The first part of the description reads, "These sands no longer move no matter how you tilt the hourglass, now and forever defying the drift of time itself," and then goes on to say,
"In a bygone time of which only the Jinn could sigh, the Lord of the Desert built a cemetery for his beloved. With the gems beneath the deep sands as a power source and the aid of the Jinn, he built an eternal oasis." Eons later, the legend of the eternal oasis spread amongst the wandering tribes of the desert. Wanderers claim that it is a place of ever-flourishing greenery, ruled by the slumbering goddess of flowers. Wanderers say that pharajies, the last mother of the Jinn, guards the grand gates to the oasis, blessing every mortal that comes before her with unwavering tenderness, be they good or ill.
The matriarchs of the Tanit, Uza, Shimti, and other tribes besides all refer to themselves as daughters of the flower goddess. With faith as their foundation and united by blood, they are further joined by mutual imaginations of the fabled Padisara garden. The scattered, struggling tribes of the desert seek the eternal oasis and endless knowledge, just as the prophecy left by their goddess foretold. Even after the scouring of civilization, humanity yet survives by their tenacity, even deprived of the guidance of the gods, even if they were forced to unite via the memory of a goddess long dead. This tear-sated desert of salt has been unable to halt humanity's tread, unable to stop them from searching for the immortal lie that is the eternal oasis. My lord, why do you command the dunes to stop flowing? Why do you bray at the winds to stop them from blowing?
Just like this hourglass, should these crystal sands mingle into a congealed whole, what would be the meaning of its existence then? Eternity is no paradise, but something that is nigh impossible to deconstruct, an obstinate stain that cannot be mended. Those who bloom like flowers, die like flowers, and rise again with the seasons like flowers, can never be troubled by the likes of death. Once, in a moment in time, the three companions engaged in idle chatter, their words seized by the flowing winds of the desert and carried across the annals of time. Somewhere in a faraway desert, the imaginings of a time-petrified oasis remain in the minds of a tribe. Yet these rootless wandering people continue the cycle of life and death amidst the flowing sands of the dunes.
This final artifact piece tells of the contemporary tribes that still retain the memory of the goddess of flowers. It also mentions a djinn by name, and for this, we're going to break our usual formula and cover one singular piece of another artifact set, because it is simply so pertinent to the story being told. This is the description attached to the goblet, Defender of the Enchanting Dream, from the Desert Pavilion Chronicle, also released in 3.3.
Travelers here to sup from the oasis, please heed this man so old and blind. Heed the dirge of Gurubad. Heed the enrapturing dreams of King Deshret. Heed the faithful but broken djinn, and heed a betrayal between companions. Legend has it that when the Lord of Flowers passed, her countless djinn turned to serve King Deshret. King Deshret searched in vain for the ancient paradise where the divine needle fell, and there created an eternal oasis. Amongst the greatest djinn was one named Pharajies, granted governance over the oasis by King Deshret. To protect her mistress's slumber, she once used her powers to keep the springs ever flowing, and so she spread greenery across the desert like stars in the sky, providing sanctuary to folk who had lost their homes.
Later, under the guidance of the genie Lilupar, the vassal states of the mortal kingdoms built their cities around the eternal oasis. Bearing loyalty to the Lord of Flowers and compassion for the newborn realms, Pharajies decided to make a sacrifice. Disobeying the charge given to her by King Deshret, the great genie caged her own body in shackles of frost, turning herself into a seal in the shape of a crystalline cup, restraining the wrath of the vast sands, guarding the cities of the mortals with her immobile form.
But there is a season for all things, and thus all things must change. As we lean on each other today, so too will we abandon each other tomorrow. To lose the freedom which the djinn are so proud of, and a vessel that can partake in joy and love, to feel the diminishment of one's spirit by the day. The nymph of the water lilies drew mortal kings into her machinations with honey-tinged lies, and the Lord of the Sands sank deep into a dream of madness. But I have long been waiting, always waiting, in a sleepless dream, waiting for the King of the Sands to fulfill his ancient promise.
Mind and body festooned with wretched machinery, she awaits the end of her mistress's slumber, bearing a sullen hope as she silently guards the broken dreams of this empire of sand. Even should the spring be mixed with bitter gravel, even if the oasis is swallowed by the sand, even amidst the eternal pulsing of machines, she listens for the coming of the footsteps that will bring change. But my teacher's so sightless, I was born into a slave's chains and had everything taken from me when I was young. Might I, abandoned by the fates like the dunes of sand as I was, be worthy of a change in my fortunes?
The tale of the secret keeper's magic bottle ends with Deshret seeing the goddess of flowers in a dream where she is trapped, wandering through a maze of crystal. It mentions swirling sands that King Deshret managed to return from, perhaps the first of the eternal sandstorms that the desert is known for, and it draws our eyes towards the ceaseless whirlwind in the northern part of the desert. The whirlwind seems to have similar atmospheric effects to the swirling clouds atop Dragonspine and around Amakumo Peak, each infused with their local element. This one, though, appears to be a pale blue, perhaps having to do with this djinn's shackles of frost.
Does this, along with this other story, suggest that the goddess of flowers is not dead at all, but asleep, dreaming, guarded by pharajies at the heart of that eternal sandstorm? I have a feeling that in a future patch not all that long from now, we're going to find out firsthand. This story also seems to suggest that a celestial nail was dropped directly on the place that the goddess of flowers sacrificed herself to give King Deshret access to the forbidden knowledge. He went seeking the nail after the fact, despite it being lost in the sandstorm that it generated. But for what purpose?
In review, we've now confirmed the meaning of the term forbidden knowledge, and we might have gone far enough to understand at least a little piece of that knowledge, the truth of Celestia. We have a better idea of what might have really happened to the three Moon Sisters and the inevitable fate of the last of them. We know that the celestial nails were dropped en masse at one point, very likely during the battle between the primordial one and the second who came.
From this, we can deduce that the primordial one lost that battle, as the original gods and envoys of the heavens were cast out into exile shortly after. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that the primordial one was defeated or completely destroyed, only strongly suggests it. We've even managed to perhaps glean a bit more about the Seelie race and the Lock folk if we're understanding what we've read at all.
This, more than even the wealth of new information we can glean about Irminsul from the Archon quests, which we will likely be covering in a future video, seems to be the biggest lore bomb dropped on us in ages. We feel like we finally have some answers, and we're thrilled to see some of our own theories be confirmed and come to fruition. We hope that this video makes the information more accessible and easier to digest.
Every little lead gets us closer to our big picture, as I'm so fond of saying. This is honestly the most exciting lore drop for me in a long, long time. And before we say goodbye, I have to say, I think we'll be asking, good gods, where is that disembodied voice coming from? Maybe next time. This is the Hexen Zirkel, signing off.
We want to thank you for sticking with us until now, and we hope that you'll join us on our next adventure.